What if the person you hurt the most was the only one quietly holding your life together, and the moment you betrayed them, everything inside you began to fall apart? Because when a narcissist betrays a super empath, they don't just lose a person, they lose their emotional shield, their stability, and the one connection that was keeping their inner chaos hidden. If you have ever given your heart, your patience, and your years to someone who took it all for granted, stay with me. Because what really happens after that betrayal is something most people never fully understand. If this message gave you clarity, subscribe now. Comment, I choose peace if you're done overgiving. Like this video to support others healing from toxic relationships. And remember, your peace is your power. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, the first and most profound loss they experience is losing the one person who truly saw through them and still chose to stay. This is not something that happens often in their life. Most people either get confused by their behavior, get hurt and leave quickly, or never fully understand the deeper patterns beneath the surface. But a super empath is different. They observe closely. They notice inconsistencies. They feel emotional shifts that others ignore. They recognize the insecurity behind the arrogance, the fear behind the control, and the wounds behind the behavior. And yet, they stay. This is what makes the loss so significant, because the super empath does not stay out of ignorance. They stay out of awareness combined with compassion. They see the flaws, the manipulation, the emotional distance, and still choose to invest. They believe in growth. They believe in healing. They believe that with enough patience, enough understanding, and enough consistency, things can improve. For a narcissist, this kind of presence is both comforting and dangerous. It is comforting because they are finally with someone who understands them at a deeper level, someone who does not immediately reject them, someone who gives them space to exist without constant judgment. But it is also dangerous because the super empath sees through the illusions. They cannot be fully controlled because they are aware. They may tolerate behavior for a time, but they are not blind to it. This creates a dynamic where the narcissist becomes used to being deeply understood without earning it. And this is where the underestimation begins. They start believing that this level of understanding is normal, that anyone would be this patient, that anyone would stay through the same patterns. They begin to assume that the empath's presence is permanent, rather than recognizing it as a choice that is being made again and again. So they stop valuing it. They take emotional insight for granted. They dismiss concerns. They minimize the empath's feelings. They may even begin to test limits, pushing boundaries just to see how far they can go without losing the connection. Because deep down, they believe the empath will not leave, and this belief becomes their greatest mistake. Because a super empath does not leave impulsively. They do not walk away at the first sign of difficulty. They try, they communicate, they reflect, they give chances, sometimes more than they should. They carry the weight of the relationship, hoping things will shift. But while they are doing all of this externally, something is changing internally. They are learning. They are observing patterns more clearly. They are noticing that their efforts are not being matched. They are realizing that understanding someone does not mean being treated with respect. And slowly, without drama, without announcement, something inside them begins to detach. This is the part the narcissist never sees coming, because the empath still looks calm, still behaves with dignity, still avoids unnecessary conflict. But emotionally, they are stepping back. They are reclaiming pieces of themselves that were once invested in the relationship. And when they finally reach the point of leaving, it is not a reaction. It is a decision. A clear, grounded, irreversible decision. This is what shocks the narcissist. Because they did not just lose someone who loved them. They lost someone who understood them deeply and still chose to walk away. And that creates a psychological impact that is very difficult to process, because now the narrative they often rely on, people just don't understand me, no longer works. You did understand them, and you still left. That creates a crack in their perception of reality, because it forces a question they do not want to face. If someone who truly understood me still walked away, what does that say about me? This is not an easy question to answer. So often, instead of confronting it directly, they try to protect their ego. They may convince themselves that you were too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding, anything that allows them to avoid the deeper truth. But even if they do not admit it openly, something stays with them. because being seen at that level is rare. Being accepted at that level is rare. And being left by someone who saw everything is unforgettable. That is why this loss is different. They can replace attention. They can replace admiration. They can replace convenience. But they cannot easily replace someone who understood their patterns, their contradictions, their defenses, and still chose to stay as long as you did. And that is the silent weight they carry. Not always spoken, not always acknowledged, but deeply felt. Because in losing you, they did not just lose love. They lost the one mirror that reflected their truth without walking away immediately. And when that mirror is gone, they are left with something they are not comfortable facing alone, themselves. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, one of the most immediate and destabilizing consequences is that their internal emotional chaos, which was once carefully managed and softened, suddenly becomes fully exposed. This is not something they are prepared for, because for a long time, they were not dealing with that chaos alone. You were quietly absorbing it, organizing it, and calming it without even being asked. A super empath has a unique ability to regulate emotional environments. They sense tension early. They adjust their tone to prevent escalation. They offer understanding instead of judgment. They slow things down when emotions run high. And over time, this becomes a stabilizing force in the relationship. But here is the key point. This stability is often invisible while it exists. The narcissist does not wake up and think, "This person is keeping me emotionally balanced." Instead, they experience life as smoother, conflicts as manageable, and stress as something that gets resolved more easily. They may even believe this is simply how life works for them, until it stops. When betrayal happens and the empath withdraws, emotionally or physically, that regulation disappears. And what is left behind is something the narcissist has not had to face fully in a long time, their own unfiltered emotional state. At first, they may not recognize what is happening. They may just feel that things are off. Conversations with others become more difficult, misunderstandings increase, small issues turn into bigger conflicts, situations that once felt manageable now feel overwhelming. This is not because life suddenly became harder, it is because the buffer is gone. Without the empath's calming presence, the narcissist is now exposed to their own impulses without interruption. Their reactions become sharper, their frustrations escalate faster. Their tolerance for discomfort decreases, and because they are not used to self-regulating in a healthy way, this creates a sense of internal instability. They may start experiencing more conflict in other relationships. People may not respond with the same patience. Others may set boundaries more quickly. Others may walk away instead of trying to fix things, and this creates confusion, because from their perspective, nothing has changed about them, but everything around them has changed. What they are actually experiencing is the absence of someone who used to translate their behavior into something more acceptable, someone who softened their edges, someone who gave them the benefit of the doubt. Without that, their behavior is now seen more directly by others, and not everyone will tolerate it. This is where the emotional chaos becomes more visible, not just externally, but internally, because now, when they feel frustration, there is no one immediately calming it. When they feel misunderstood, there is no one interpreting things in their favor. When they feel stress, there is no one quietly helping them process it. They are left with their own reactions. And for someone who has avoided deep self-reflection, this can feel overwhelming. Instead of processing these feelings, they may try to escape them. More distractions, more external validation, more attempts to regain control in other areas of life. But these are temporary solutions, because the root issue remains. They are now experiencing themselves without the filter you once provided. This is why life often starts to feel more chaotic for them after the loss of a super empath. It is not just about missing you. It is about losing the emotional structure you were providing. And this structure was not something they consciously built. It was something you brought into their life through your emotional intelligence, your patience, and your ability to stay grounded. Now, without it, they are faced with something unfamiliar: emotional responsibility. They have to manage their own reactions. They have to face the consequences of their behavior without someone cushioning the impact. They have to navigate relationships without someone constantly repairing the damage. And this is not easy, because it requires skills they may have never fully developed. Meanwhile, something very important is happening on your side. You are no longer carrying their emotional weight. You are no longer adjusting your behavior to keep things calm. You are no longer overthinking every interaction to prevent conflict. And as a result, your life begins to feel lighter, calmer, more stable. which creates a powerful contrast, because while their life becomes more chaotic, yours becomes more peaceful. And that contrast is not accidental. It is the natural result of where the emotional energy was being invested. For a long time, you were using your strength to stabilize them. Now you are using that same strength to stabilize yourself, and that shift changes everything because it reveals a truth many people only realize later in life. You were not the difficult part of the relationship. You were the one holding it together. And when that role ends, the structure that depended on it begins to shake. That is why their emotional chaos becomes exposed, not because you caused it, but because you stopped managing it for them. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, one of the most difficult realities they eventually face is that they cannot replace the depth of that connection. At first, they may not even try to understand this. Their instinct is usually to move forward quickly, to seek new attention, new validation, new relationships that can fill the space that was left behind. On the surface, it may even appear that they have moved on effortlessly. But what they are actually doing is substituting depth with distraction, because attention is easy to find, admiration is easy to find, surface level connection is easy to find. But what a super empath offers is not surface, it is depth. And depth is something that cannot be recreated quickly or casually or without effort. A super empath brings a rare combination into a relationship. They are emotionally aware, meaning they understand not just what is being said, but what is being felt beneath the surface. They are patient, meaning they do not react impulsively, but instead take time to process and respond. They are resilient, meaning they can stay grounded even when things become difficult. And perhaps most importantly, they are invested, not just in the relationship, but in the growth of the other person. This kind of connection takes time to build. It takes trust. It takes consistency. It takes emotional presence. And once it is broken, it cannot simply be replaced by starting over with someone new. But a narcissistic personality often believes it can. They may think, I'll find someone else. There are plenty of people out there. This isn't a big loss. And in the beginning, it may even feel that way. New people bring novelty. New conversations feel exciting. New interactions are free from history, from expectations, from accountability. There is a sense of lightness in starting fresh. But novelty fades, and when it does, reality begins to show. Because new people do not automatically bring the same level of emotional depth. They may not understand subtle emotional cues. They may not have the same patience. They may not tolerate the same behaviors. They may not be willing to invest the same level of energy into understanding and maintaining the relationship. And this is when comparison begins. Not always consciously, not always openly, but internally. They begin to notice that conversations feel different, that conflicts escalate faster, that misunderstandings are not resolved as easily, that emotional support feels limited or conditional. They may start to feel that something is missing, but they cannot easily define what it is, because what is missing is not something obvious like attention or attraction. What is missing is emotional depth, and emotional depth is not something you can demand or create instantly. It is something that develops over time through trust, consistency, and genuine care. This is why replacement does not work the way they expect. They may have people around them, they may have attention, they may have interactions, but they do not have the same connection. And this creates a quiet dissatisfaction because they are experiencing relationships that feel less stable, less understanding, less grounded. And at some level, they begin to recognize the difference. They begin to understand that what they had before was not ordinary, that not everyone is willing to see beyond surface behavior, that not everyone is willing to stay through difficult moments, that not everyone is willing to invest emotionally without immediate return. And this realization can be uncomfortable because it challenges a belief they often rely on, that people are interchangeable, but they are not, especially not people who bring depth. A super empath does not just fill a role, they create an environment where emotions are processed, not avoided, where conflict is managed, not escalated, where growth is encouraged, not resisted. And when that environment is gone, it cannot simply be recreated with someone else. It requires a level of emotional maturity that cannot be forced. This is why many narcissistic individuals continue searching, new connections, new attention, new experiences. But often, there is a pattern. Initial excitement, followed by disappointment, followed by restlessness, because what they are looking for is not just someone new, they are looking for something they lost, and what they lost was rare. Meanwhile, the super empath begins to experience something different: clarity. They begin to see that their depth was not a weakness, that their patience was not something to be taken for granted, that their ability to connect deeply was a strength. And instead of giving that depth to someone who could not value it, they begin to redirect it toward themselves, toward their own peace, toward their own growth, toward relationships that are more balanced. And this is where the true shift happens. Because while the narcissist struggles to replace what was lost, the super empath realizes they were never replaceable. And that realization changes everything because it restores something that may have been slowly diminished over time: self-worth. And once that is fully reclaimed, there is no going back to being undervalued again. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, one of the most defining reasons the situation never truly gets repaired is this: their ego stands in the way of genuine healing. Not just temporarily, but consistently, deeply, and often permanently. Because real repair requires something that directly threatens the narcissistic identity: accountability. At the surface level, it may seem like repair is possible. There may be moments where they appear reflective. They may say things that sound like apologies. They may even acknowledge certain actions. And for someone who once loved deeply, especially someone with empathy, this can create a sense of hope. But hope, when not grounded in consistent behavior, becomes a trap. Because true repair is not built on words, it is built on sustained change. And sustained change requires the ability to sit with discomfort, to admit fault without deflecting, to understand the impact of one's actions, and to actively work on doing better over time. This is where the narcissistic ego resists, because admitting they hurt you is not just about saying "I'm sorry." It means accepting that they were wrong. It means accepting that their behavior caused damage. It means letting go of the belief that they are always justified, always misunderstood, always the victim. And for someone whose identity is built around maintaining superiority or control, this kind of humility feels threatening. So instead of true repair, what often happens is something else. They minimize, they justify, they reframe. They might say, "It wasn't that bad," or "You're too sensitive," or "I was going through a lot." These statements are not repair. They are protection. Protection of the ego from having to fully face the truth. And this creates a cycle where the issue is never truly resolved, because if the harm is minimized, it cannot be fully acknowledged. If it is not acknowledged, it cannot be corrected. And if it is not corrected, it will repeat. This is why many super empaths find themselves exhausted in these dynamics. Not because they are unwilling to forgive, but because they are asked to forgive something that is still happening. They are asked to move forward without real change. They are asked to accept partial responsibility for something they did not create. They are asked to understand endlessly while receiving very little understanding in return. And over time, this imbalance becomes unsustainable, because even the most patient person reaches a point where understanding without change feels like self-betrayal. This is where the deeper realization begins, that repair is not just about willingness from one side. It requires equal effort, equal accountability, equal emotional investment. And when one person is consistently avoiding that responsibility, the relationship cannot truly heal. From the narcissist's perspective, this creates a different kind of struggle, because part of them may feel the loss. Part of them may recognize that something valuable is slipping away, but instead of addressing the behavior that caused the damage, they focus on managing the perception of the situation. They may try to appear improved rather than actually improving. They may say the right things in the moment, but fail to sustain them over time. They may attempt to reconnect without addressing the underlying issues, because addressing those issues requires them to confront parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding, and that is uncomfortable. So they choose the easier path: avoidance over accountability, image over substance, short-term relief over long-term growth. But this choice has consequences. Because without real repair, the connection continues to weaken, trust continues to erode, and eventually the person who once gave everything begins to step back, not out of anger, but out of clarity, because they realize that no matter how much they understand, they cannot do the work for someone else. They cannot create growth where there is resistance. They cannot build a healthy relationship alone. And this is where the final separation often becomes inevitable. Not because there was no love, but because there was no sustainable change. For the narcissist, this creates a lasting impact, because they are left with the awareness, whether conscious or not, that something meaningful ended. But without the internal shift required for growth, they may repeat the same patterns elsewhere. And this is the deeper tragedy: not just the loss of one relationship, but the continuation of a cycle that prevents real connection. Meanwhile, the super empath moves in a different direction. They begin to understand that love is not just about how much you give, it is about what is being built together. They begin to recognize that empathy should not come at the cost of self respect, that forgiveness should not require ignoring reality, that patience should not mean accepting patterns that never change, and with that understanding, they reclaim something powerful: discernment, the ability to see clearly, to choose wisely, and to walk away when necessary. Because in the end, the relationship was not destroyed by lack of love, it was prevented from healing by lack of accountability, and that is something no amount of empathy can fix.